Welcome to Refugee Assistance Partners New Jersey, or RAP. Thank you for being a volunteer. This training module will walk you through the specific policies of RAP, which will guide your work as a volunteer and clarify how these policies underscore our mission. This video provides an audiovisual option to learn about RAP policies. Be sure to read the slides as you listen along to the narration. The full text of RAP's policy guide is in the Better Impact Volunteer Portal in the document library. The policies in this training module have been developed by the RAP Board of Trustees and reviewed by attorneys with pro bono partnership. Some are required by state or federal law, and all policies reflect the priorities of the organization. RAP policies are subject to periodic review to be sure we serve our clients and volunteers in the best way possible. Input regarding policy effectiveness can be given to the executive director or a trustee for consideration by the Board of Trustees. This training will include client-facing policies as well as internal policies affecting volunteers. For this training's outcomes, we hope to build an understanding of the policies guiding us, to foster a climate of partnership and respect, and to hone our skills in applying ethical standards to our work. Learning about policies helps communicate and underscore RAP's Code of Ethics. We all work together as part of a RAP team to act within this code as a way to honor you, the clients we serve, and the organization. Let's review before we dive into some specific policies. Policies do three very important things. First, they set up rules to guide our behavior as representatives of the organization. Second, they clarify our expectations of volunteers, staff, and the board. And finally, policies underscore and amplify our organizational values and beliefs. What we believe as an organization informs the policies that we adopt. To review, our mission is to welcome refugees and help them on their path to self-sufficiency while respecting their dignity and uniqueness. The values we profess are welcome, collaboration, community, resilience, and respect. And our guiding principles are to consider culture, consider power, respect privacy and confidentiality, and manage expectations in our work with RAP. The first section of policies is the Volunteer Code of Conduct and Clients' Rights. This section has 12 smaller parts that remind us to act in the best interest of the people we serve, to always work in partnership with clients and avoid overreaching in our roles, and to emphasize and strengthen clients' right to self-determination. Note that we are referring to our clients' right to autonomy and choice, not their legal rights. So let's look at the Code of Conduct and Clients' Rights. Goal setting. Setting goals is a partnership between RAP volunteers and clients. We might suggest goals at first, then the power and direction of goal setting shifts to be squarely in the hands of the clients. Even so, we act in partnership with clients from the beginning. Note that if U.S. citizenship is a client goal, we'll want to clarify that early on since English is required and clients might need some time to develop proficiency. Our role is to empower clients to gain control over the direction of their lives. Gifts from volunteers directly to clients. We want to treat clients fairly, avoid misunderstandings, and decrease power imbalances in our interactions. Therefore, volunteers should not give money or gifts worth more than $50 directly to active clients without approval from the executive director. Approvals also help keep other team members informed of client family situations and any emergent needs. Although volunteers can give to families by making a donation to RAP, giving unrestricted funds is always preferable since client situations and conditions fluctuate often. Medication, drug, and substance use and/or transference. Don't give medications or drugs to clients. You can help clients get medicine that a doctor has prescribed through their pharmacy or help them seek medical care or ask for a prescription. As a WRAP representative, do not give medical advice, even if you are trained to do so. Instead, refer them to their own medical provider. Our duty is to empower the clients to make their own informed decisions, especially in their medical care. Requirement to abide by the law. We expect volunteers to follow the law, but some laws get overlooked more easily, such as copyright protections or traffic laws. Nevertheless, we must follow them to set a good example. If clients break the law, WRAP might reduce our services. We can clarify clients' legal obligations only to the extent that we have verified public knowledge of the law. As a WRAP representative, under no circumstances do we give legal advice, even if trained to do so. We should refer clients to a licensed attorney. As volunteers, we model respect for American laws for clients who may or may not have benefited from the rule of law in their country of origin. Volunteer personal vehicle use. You might be transporting clients in your own car. If so, you need to maintain certain good driving requirements. When driving children, follow the two-adult rule, found in the Protection Policy section of this training and explained in the Protection of Children and Vulnerable Adults policy. The safety of our clients and volunteers are top priority. Clients must sign for themselves. Never sign a document on behalf of a client. We respect that their signature is their own personal attestation. If a client is illiterate and cannot sign when they want to, the volunteer can teach the client how to make their mark, making sure they understand its significance. Clients always have the right to refuse to sign. A signature is the highest form of empowerment. Truth in service provision. WRAP volunteers are to be honest and straightforward. Some information might have negative effects, so we must communicate honestly and completely with compassion, but we do not withhold verified information. Be objective. Refrain from making conclusions or judgments. Avoid guessing about information. Confirm information beforehand. It's okay to say, I don't know. Honesty is critical to building trust and showing respect in our interactions. Right to privacy. Volunteers should respect people's privacy and autonomy. For example, don't go to people's homes unannounced or enter their home without being invited in. It's totally fine to go in upon being invited, but volunteers do so at their own risk since we cannot guarantee the safe condition of their property. Respecting privacy takes many forms that we must be cognizant of. Protection of confidential information. To adhere to confidentiality as part of the WRAP volunteer agreement signed when volunteers first register in Better Impact, the volunteer portal. Let's draw attention to two specific situations. First, the volunteers should avoid keeping passwords for students and should not use client passwords without their knowledge and consent. This is also a privacy issue. Second, do not include personal or confidential information via email. Emails are easily hacked. WRAP's guiding principle of respecting privacy and confidentiality necessitates adhering to data security measures, even when it's inconvenient. Client information. Volunteers may need personal client information to fulfill their role. It's up to the clients to choose to disclose to us. If information is to be given to a third party, only send with the client's prior informed consent. Remember, clients always maintain the right to say no. Professional service parameters. When acting as a representative of RAP, do not give medical or legal advice, even if trained to do so. Instead, volunteers should refer clients to appropriate community resources. RAP provides non-professional support services. Our role is to connect clients to professional services and resources in specific fields as needed. Mutual right to terminate. Either party can limit, reduce, or stop RAP services for any reason. We all maintain the right to disengage at any point. Now that we've covered the RAP Code of Conduct and clients' rights, let's look at RAP protection policies and a few internal policies. RAP has two protection policies, a policy about the use of images and a child protection policy. The use of information and likenesses in media, audio, and visual recordings are powerful storytelling tools. When deciding what, when, and how to use information and likenesses, consider what possible effects sharing might have and act in the best interest of the person being depicted. For some refugees, children, and other vulnerable people, negative consequences could be severe. Explain what the images will be used for and get client consent. Children and adults in very vulnerable situations might require special precautions to avoid disclosing names, locations, or other identifying contextual information. Perhaps you use a pseudonym. With any use of information, be truthful and respectful of the person's dignity, acting out of respect and compassion, not pity. Images should be used to educate and inspire action. The Protection in Children and Vulnerable Adults policy nurtures an environment where children and adults feel safe, listened to, respected, and valued. An adult is not assumed to be vulnerable just by being a refugee. We can start with that assumption, but it might not stay that way when we learn more. Children are always assumed to be vulnerable because of the inherent power imbalance and lack of knowledge. Note that children and vulnerable adults might include some RAP volunteers, so this policy is for all of RAP. RAP follows the two-adult rule. At least two adults should be present with the child. We prefer at least one adult be a child's family member or close friend if possible. One adult could be alone with a group of children. If the presence of a second adult is not practical or possible, one-on-one interactions must be public and observable. This two-adult rule also applies when driving clients and volunteers' personal vehicles, as referred to earlier in the training in the Code of Conduct section. RAP takes child abuse and exploitation very seriously. In general, if anyone suspects child abuse or exploitation, New Jersey state law requires them to report it to the authorities. The volunteer reporting the suspected abuse informs their RAP team leader and the executive director or RAP trustee in that order. Then the executive director or the reporting volunteer will call either the police or the state's child protective services. Please take time to read the full RAP policy in the Better Impact Volunteer Portal for detailed instructions on how to address this situation. In our experience, encountering possible child abuse is quite rare, but volunteers should never be afraid to act in the best interest of a child. Use the full text of this policy to guide your steps. Remember, you are not alone. You are part of the RAP team. The next section briefly covers several internal policies pertinent to volunteers, trustees, and staff. Non-discrimination. RAP serves displaced families and individuals and welcomes volunteers equally, regardless of any personal characteristic listed here or otherwise protected by law. RAP also prohibits harassment based on any of these characteristics. Freedom from harassment. In a more general sense, RAP prohibits harassment for any reason. Harassment refers to behavior that is not welcome, that is personally offensive or is offensive to a reasonable person, that debilitates morale. WRAP does not tolerate harassment of employees, volunteers, or clients. If a volunteer believes they have been or are being harassed, they should report this to the executive director without fear of retaliation. Termination. Finally, WRAP reserves the right to terminate volunteers or staff who violate WRAP principles and policies upon review from the organization. Now let's cover WRAP's reimbursement policy. WRAP has 3 tiers of expenses. Volunteers can request reimbursement for up to $250 with approval from the executive director or treasurer. WRAP's expenses in the second tier, $250 to $500, must be pre-approved by the executive director or treasurer and are usually incurred by WRAP itself, not with reimbursements. Expenses in the highest tier must be pre-approved by the treasurer or the board's executive committee. All expenses must be reported to the executive director, who informs the treasurer and the accounting services monthly for reporting, bookkeeping, and tax purposes. Expenses must be in alignment with organizational values and priorities. Expenses required by contract or expenses to fulfill specific budget commitments do not need approval, since the contract and budget were previously approved by the board. If there's a question about the merit of a possible expense or funding request, WRAP has a tool to guide the executive director and treasurer's decision-making. Background checks are necessary for the safety of both the volunteers and the clients. All volunteers, trustees, and staff are required to register in Better Impact, our volunteer portal. Most volunteers and all trustees and staff must also pass a background check. They must be renewed every 3 years in alignment with industry standards. Our contracted service provider is an industry leader, and their checks are safe and secure to do. WRAP only receives the results of the check, not any of the data. Volunteers can substitute a check from an independent source if their check's criminal searches match our requirements. Deciding who needs a background check depends on their level of involvement and the type of work they do with WRAP. If a volunteer falls into any of the A categories listed here, a background check is needed. If the volunteer falls into the B category for all 3 areas, then a background check is not required. Volunteers who are minors at the time of their service do not need to pass a background check. Minor volunteers are supervised by an adult who has passed their background check. This might be a parent or guardian, or it might be another WRAP volunteer. Lastly, we'll cover WRAP's whistleblower policy. The whistleblower policy guides volunteers, trustees, and staff on when and how to report wrongful conduct. These ethical violations should be reported as soon as possible and up-channeled to the board president. Every report will be investigated. The person reporting does not have to prove their case, but should show that they are acting in good faith. As long as they report in good faith and not maliciously, there will not be negative consequences. To that end, the identity of the person reporting is kept confidential, except for when the investigation requires it to be shared with those reviewing the case. Anonymous reporting is allowed, but might not be sufficient for the investigation. Let's wrap up with a very quick summary. In this training, we reviewed WRAP's mission and values, walked through our code of conduct and clients' rights, explained protection policies and other internal policies, and clarified reimbursements, background checks, and WRAP's whistleblower policy. Thank you for completing this policy training for volunteers. Remember to agree to the attestation at the end to fulfill this training qualification. Thank you for being a WRAP volunteer.